We have a series of short 5 or 10 to 15 minute little presentations to help you understand the concerns that we have about the cancer clusters in Waycross, to identify if we have cancer clusters. We hope you will take the time to listen to these. These don't just pertain to children. It's pertain to our situation as adults. It's not just Waycross, and it's not just Ware County. It's not just city water. It's not county water. It's all of us that need to be paying attention and participating. This presentation is going to be split into 4 parts. Part 1 is, do we have a cancer cluster in Waycross? We're going to talk about a little bit about why we look at childhood cancers, and then we're going to talk about the CDC's investigation and what they look for. Part 2 is, what are the pathways of exposure? That means, how are people possibly getting exposed? Part 3 is, why all this hoopla over the water? Do we currently have a city water problem? Do we have a county water problem? We're going to talk about shallow wells and deep wells. We're going to talk about our request to the city of Waycross to get water records. We want to talk about why the water records are important. And then part 4, we're going to talk about air. Air and water work together. We drink water, but we breathe air. So if we're having problems in either one of these areas, they need to be addressed. And we're going to talk a little bit about how they might work together. Does Waycross have a cancer cluster? Under this first section, why do we focus on children? Other people are affected, and I hear that often. People call me and say, I don't have a child, but I'm an adult and I'm sick. And we want everybody to know that we have tons of adult cancers. We're seeing increases in throat and esophageal and nasal and mouth cancers, on top of all the other types of cancers that we've discussed. But the reason why we focus on the children is because children they've lived less number of years, shorter number of years, and so because they've lived a shorter number of years, they've had less time to accumulate other environmental toxins that may affect their health. So in order for us to try to get help for the community, we've had to drill down into something that would alert the CDC. As part of that alert, we have, and thank God for these parents that have been willing to share information with us, because that information that they have shared helps to analyze what's going on in the overall community, but it helps us also to drill down into what the possible problems are. So you understanding these children's cases will help you to understand the things that are going on maybe in your life or in your household. But we want you to know that we feel like everybody is important, every life matters. The CDC has a series of about 6 questions. We're going to go over those 6 questions that they look at in determining if there is a cancer cluster. But there's one statement that is very important, and it says a suspected cancer cluster is more likely to be a true cluster rather than a coincidence if it involves one or more of these factors: a large number of cases of one type of cancer rather than several different types, a rare type of cancer rather than common types, and an increased number of cases of certain types of cancer in an age group that is not usually affected by that type of cancer. Well, our rhabdomyosarcomas answered this question in 2 areas. It's a rare type of cancer rather than a common type, and we also have an increased number of that certain type of rare cancer than what we should have. So that statement, right by itself, is enough to warrant a suspected cancer cluster that is more likely to be a true cluster rather than a coincidence. Do we have a greater than expected number of cases? The answer to that is yes. According to national averages, we should have 1.55 cases per year, and they base that on the number of children in a community. So in Ware County, we have approximately 8,310 children. They divide that by 1,000,000, and they come up with the ratio of number of cases that we should have. If you look at our childhood cancer rates, they have steadily been growing. They were none. Then we started having 1 in 2012, 2013 and 14 we had 2, and then in 2015 we had 8. That 8 cases is 500% more children with childhood cancer than we should have. Now we have to be careful here, and we have to look at what the state is looking at and what the CDC looks at, because often what happens is they take these figures and they average them out over 10 years. Well, if you took our cancers, our 8, 2, that's 12, 13 cases, and averaged them over 10 years, then it may look like our numbers are smaller. But in reality, the numbers are huge. They are growing exponentially every year. So we have to make sure when we're looking at this, and when we're looking at what the CDC or the state of Georgia presents to us, that we are actually making sure that we're explaining to them. They may be looking at 10 years figures, but if they look incrementally year by year, they will see that our cancers are growing. We don't want to wait 10 or 20 years for them to analyze this. We want the problem solved now. One of the questions the CDC looks at is, of the cancers, are they all the same kind of cancer? So the answer to that is yes. We've actually had 2 clusters. We had one cluster that was identified by Georgia Department of Health in 2014, and their study looked at Pierce County and Ware County children, and they decided that we had 300% more lymphoma childhood cancer cases during that period of time that they investigated that. We have a second childhood cancer cluster that really started like 2014 or 2015, and it includes our rare rhabdomyosarcoma cases. Rhabdomyosarcoma, out of the 8,300 children that we have, we should have 1 case every 25 years. But instead, we had 3 cases in 58 days. So we're going to talk about this, and that right there, that one thing is enough to alert the CDC. However, from my perspective, I don't want them to just focus on that. I understand why they're doing it. They're doing that because the other childhood cancers, leukemia and brain tumors, can be caused by many different types of chemicals, so they're trying to narrow it down. However, we need to make sure that everybody looks at the big picture of this. So we're gonna talk about more than just the rare rhabdomyosarcomas. We'll put a main focus on those, but we're going to talk about all of these cancers. On this slide, we're going to look at could these lymphomas and sarcomas be caused by the same chemical? Because that's a question that is asked. In order to have a cancer cluster, you have to have a common chemical or a common source. And so There are some chemicals that do cause both lymphomas and sarcomas. They include dioxins, which includes TCD, D, and that category is dioxins and furans. Radiation can cause both lymphomas and sarcomas. Polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, which you might have heard me talk about in the past, which includes benzene, pyrene, indiopyrene, and others. Those that chemical can cause lymphomas and sarcomas. TCE can cause lymphomas and sarcomas. Agent Orange can cause lymphomas and sarcomas. And then there are pesticides and herbicides, specific pesticides and herbicides that can cause lymphomas and sarcomas. These agents can also cause all the other types of cancers that we have seen, leukemia and the brain cancers. Also, I want you to know that those other chemicals that we talked about in the previous slide, they can cause the brain cancers and they can cause the leukemias that we also saw in the cancer clusters, in the children's cancers. Additionally, though, we want to talk in this slide about just quickly, about could these cancers be caused not necessarily from the same chemical, but from the same source. And I say that because we have quite a few areas in Waycross and around Waycross that are either Superfund sites or what they call RCRA sites, which is a type of Superfund site, but it's a type of federally known contaminated site, but it's actually instead of being monitored by the federal government, which a Superfund site is, a RCRA site is basically monitored by the state. So we have quite a few RCRA sites and one Superfund site. Each one of these sites doesn't just have one or two chemicals. Some of these sites could have 10, 15, or 20 different chemicals of concern for that specific site. So if that site is the source of our problem, then it is not only giving off, TCE or vinyl chloride or dioxins, but it may be giving off vinyl chloride, benzene, DDT, which can affect brain and non-Hodgkin's lymphomas. So I say that because if that source has affected groundwater and people are drinking that source, you may have somebody in that house that takes and drinks some water and they get a little bit of benzene poisoning, and then the next day somebody else drinks something different and they get vinyl chloride poisoning or the dioxins. So we need to really be aware that the sources can have multiple chemicals and they can affect people in different ways. One question that the CDC looks at when they're looking at cancer clusters are all of them of the same age group or demographic. So the answer for our cancer clusters that we are trying to get them to focus on initially is that yes, these are all children and they're all below the age of 20. Do the children with cancer live or lived or frequent the same area? We've provided a link, and this link has the locations of some of the childhood cancers that we know about. And so this map has these children in basically date order. So you start at the top. If you look on the left-hand side of the map, then you will see the initials, and you can kind of go down and those are in date order. So because the parents were willing to share a lot of information with us, and we just can't tell you how much we appreciate all these parents and these children, we have been able to basically map out areas of concern. Some of the children, some of the moms may have been pregnant and lived in a certain area. Some of the children may have lived in a certain area. For instance, the Ruskin School area in the first cancer cluster was an area of concern. Well, we had some moms some children who got cancer and their moms had worked at Ruskin School. But we had some other children that got cancer. Their moms may or may not have worked there, but maybe they lived in the area. So those are still all those are what we call areas of concern. So this map will help you kind of look through that. It's also important for our discussion because we're going to show that there is a relationship in the first cancer cluster that was reported, and most of those children were on county water. And then in the second cancer cluster, which includes the majority of the sarcomas and the rare rhabdomyosarcomas, plus some of the other cancers, a majority of those children were on city water. Did the cases occur in the same time frame? Okay, so the first cancer cluster of children, which includes the children at Ruskin Elementary and the lymphoma cluster that was identified by DPH, appear to be on county water. Ruskin School was on county water. The time frame was 2010 to 2013. Some of the children affected in that include Coleman Lee, Clayton Lee, Amherst, Maddie, Ashland. And this picture was taken when there was a fundraiser, and they were taking a strike out of cancer. Others that were reported at that time included Chase Brody, Callie Lucas, and Austin King, who lived in Pierce County. And at this point, I don't know if their parents had any connection to Waycross or the county water supply, or if they were on deep wells, because that is a factor. But if they did, we would hope that they would share some more information with us. Two of these earlier cases, as I mentioned, were sarcoma cases. Okay, in our second cancer cluster of children, they were diagnosed in 2014 and 2015. These kind of started out with Nayland, and then they escalated in 2015. We had, 8, and those included the super rare pediatric cancers. When those cases came along, that was enough for us to try to really push to get the CDC involved, and that's why we've put a lot of focus on these rare rhabdomyosarcomas. Now, there are people that want to say, well, these children didn't have anything in common. Gage, but they did. A common exposure was that they all had access to drinking city water. Now, there may be other pathways of exposure also, and those other pathways need to be investigated. But Lexi lived in Waycross, was on city water. Harris lives in Waycross, was on city water. And Gage's mom told me that while she was pregnant with Gage, she lived in Waycross. So that is very important because that is a factor that the CDC and the Georgia Department of Health must consider in investigating our area. So our conclusion to part 1 is, yes, we have a cancer cluster. We have several cancer clusters by CDC definition. What can you do? So we're going to remind you this. We're going to have this little slide a couple of times during these presentations. You need to attend the upcoming CDC ASTDR availability session on March 15th. It's going to be held at South Georgia State College at the Educational Building in the lobby area, which is in front of the auditorium. CDC ASTDR Georgia Department of Health will be there from 2 to 4 and from 6 to 8. It is very, very important that everybody go by and talk to them about your health concerns of your family, concerns about these childhood cancers. There was a past session that was held by the Georgia Department of Health about a year and a half ago, and that session was kind of similar to this, where you basically went in and I guess they had the little tables and you went up and you could talk to them. But what we all came back feeling after that meeting was like that they had tried to divide us up so that people couldn't hear and engage in communication that let others understand the problems that are going on. So we're hoping that this meeting is not designed like that. But regardless of how the meeting is designed, your voice needs to be heard. You need to go to this meeting or this availability session and tell them that we expect them to find the answers. They can do this. And they need to involve the community because we know what's going on here. We're able to share information with them. We have sent them hundreds, if not literally hundreds, if not close to thousands of emails on our problems and sharing information with them. What else can you do? Spread the word. Share this information with your neighbors. Get your neighbors to watch these videos so that they can educate themselves, or these presentations, so they can educate themselves on the problem. And then the other thing you can do is support our local fundraising efforts. Just a few people have paid for most of the testing that has been done to date. That's been independent testing that lets us know, where the problems are. And we need desperately to do some more testing. And I think you're going to see why we need that pretty shortly.